In Chapter 24, we're now looking at the aftermath of the stock market crash in the Great Depression. And what we get from that is the New Deal. And this is basically the program that we get out of the Roosevelt administration, which starts in 1933. As we saw, many of the themes in the New Deal are actually a continuation of what William Jennings Bryan had proposed in the 1896 presidential election. And that the New Deal basically was focused on three things. The one would be temporary immediate relief of a problem. Second, we'd be talking about more permanent solutions, and then we would be talking about reforming the system to make it better. And so when we talk about the New Deal, sorry, not 8. When we talk about the New Deal, we really need to talk about it in terms of two stages. The first New Deal, which goes from 1933 to 34, which deals with the first of those two problems, which would be the immediate relief that's needed. And then the second New Deal is more about the reforms and the permanent improvements. Hoover, again, obviously loses the election of 1932. Hoover unsuccessfully had tried to say that the Great Depression was Europe's fault and we should just keep letting the market figure things out and that the Great Depression will basically just go away. Roosevelt, for his part, to become president, basically said, yeah, the government will have to do some stuff, but he didn't really say what he was going to do. And quite honestly, it might be that he didn't even know himself what he was going to do, because even by the time he was elected, the problem had become significantly worse, as we saw in the previous chapter with the banking crisis. And so the first New Deal, and especially those first 100 days, you get the Civilian Conservation Corps, which is the CCC, the Agricultural Adjustment Act, which is the AAA, and then the National Industrial Recovery Administration, the NIRA. It's all about immediate relief and recovery of the economic problems. Then, 1935 to 1941, it's about creating permanent improvements, changing the structure of the economy. There we get the Social Security Administration. We also get the Fair Labor Standards Act, among other things, in trying to reform the system. So, it's during this first New Deal, largely, where the government's basically, the federal government is basically now going to get involved. And it's going to supplement what's being done on the state and local level. We get the Works Progress Administration, which is probably the most popular manifestation of what the of how the government got involved. And what the Works Progress Administration was all about was like, you know, government hiring people to build bridges, build roads, build airport runways, all those kinds of things. Plus, hire photographers, artists, and whatnot to do what they do so that they have money, giving the unemployed cash, making them confident so that they actually go out there and enjoy the aspect of working, and continue to stay in the labor force. At its peak, you've got about 7% of the labor force employed by the government by 1936. And so you see ads like this, right? So this would be ads that would be basically like advertisements posted, posters, put up on, windows of businesses and whatnot. Work promotes confidence. Works Progress Administration. Now the artwork itself was made by, right, an unemployed artist hired by the government. And it basically is propaganda saying basically what does the government want. The government wants people to work because their belief is that if people work, they become more confident about themselves and how the market system, the market economy system. Here we've got, again, another piece of propaganda art created by an unemployed artist in the Works Progress Administration. And here, you can see what's happening here is that the federal government has given money to the state of Illinois. Illinois has created basically a branch of the Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC. And what the CCC was all about was basically getting, in this case, young men, putting them out in nature and having them build trails, cut trees, build water projects, do all the things that basically control nature. And the idea was that they would be given a set pay, they'd be given room and board, so basically they'd be fed a lot, and they'd be working hard, building confidence in working, and then they would have to send a big chunk of money home as well, thus supporting, the parents or the family members that were all part of the Civilian Conservation Corps. We have a few projects here in Hawaii that were part of the Civilian Conservation Corps. There's a pretty good database online. Now let's see here. Looks like there were 5 parks, basically many of them on the different islands. Looks like there was one at Schofield Barracks. So basically you've got these campgrounds. Right, so this would be Haleakala Crater. You've got these campgrounds, and then you're just going out there and doing work. Guess they're building the national parks. Here they're marching in the Kamehameha Day Parade in Hilo. Building a road in Volcano Park. I don't know what that is. More from the park. Trails. Oh, and Franklin Roosevelt actually actually on the Big Island, it looks like. It looks like a lot of this is from the Big Island. Oh, they still have some of the parks available. Kauai. Anyway, you don't need me to keep going through that. But perhaps one of the biggest projects of the Works Progress Administration, and definitely one of the most controversial, was in the Tennessee Valley. So you've got about a 7-state area of the country, which was incredibly poor. Incredibly poor. You had farmers who couldn't grow enough crops. You had a population that didn't have enough food and didn't have electricity. And so the idea was that the government was going to build dams and control the water, and in controlling the water, they would be able to irrigate the land to make it produce more food and generate electricity, thus competing with the other private electric companies, thus causing the controversy that now you've got a government company basically that's going to compete against compete out of existence basically private power companies. So here's the map of what the Tennessee Valley was covering. Still exists to this day. Still provides power in all these areas. These dams all still exist. So you get farmer education, flood control, and electricity being generated. Now, we're not going to watch this whole thing here, but let's just watch a portion of this. We're not going to watch the whole thing.
More than 300 years ago, the first pioneers crossed the oceans to a new world. A promise called them. The promise of a land where a man could build his own house, farm his own acres, raise his children in freedom. They carved from the wilderness an empire of agriculture and industry. They set for themselves new and higher standards of living. And yet, in one of the great river valleys of America, something went wrong.
So I'm going to pause this here. See that poverty? That poverty, just building the Tennessee Valley Authority doesn't remove immediately that poverty. That poverty exists through the 1960s. And even to today, quite honestly. Not as bad as what this looks like, but just imagine that the 1960s in the United States, 1960s in the United States, doesn't look a lot different than this. Doesn't look a lot different than that. So this image of what you're seeing here, although this film is made in 1944, as you can see at the top there, it's reflecting what the Tennessee Valley looked like in the 1930s. And obviously fixing that abject poverty was the goal of the administration. I'm going to skip ahead a few things here too. So you can obviously watch this all whenever you want. But I'll skip around a little bit here.
In the Tennessee Valley, 3 centuries later, the descendants of the pioneers were a neglected people, living in a ruined land. For these children, the hope and the promise were dead. For them, the only future was poverty, ignorance, drudgery. The struggle to scratch a bare living from the reluctant soil.
Right, so there you got your crops all dying. Farmer pretty grumpy about things.
It found the men to supervise the job.
And here we got the building of the Tennessee Valley Authority.
James
TVA.
P. Pope, United States Senator from the West. Harcourt Morgan, President of the University of Tennessee, who had worked out an agricultural program for the whole area. David Lilienthal, Administrator and Champion of Legislation for Cooperative Electric Power. George Norris, a great American statesman, who long had dreamed of regional planning, of setting up a national experiment in one region which could serve as a yardstick for every region. This was the plan, to chain the river through a series of giant dams, checking the floods. To open it to navigation from its mouth to its headwaters. To give the farmers the benefit of modern science and research. To help them control the water on their land and restore the fertility of the soil. To reforest millions of acres on the ravaged hillsides, to exploit the mineral resources of the area, to use the electric power generated by the dams to develop and rehabilitate industry in the cities, to electrify the farms through rural cooperatives. Above all, to prove that human problems can be solved by reason, science, and education. The Tennessee Valley was to be pioneered again, this time to be developed, not plundered. This time not for the benefit of a few, but for the many who lived in it.
So you can see an idea then of what the plan is and how it's going to be carried out by the government. Here you've got the building of it. Just imagine how scary that would have been to individuals who'd always been on a farm, seeing all this equipment coming in and building.
The dam builders, 200,000 of them in all, 4,000 on this one project. Valley farmers and miners, mountaineers and city workers. To them, this was more than a job. They had a stake in what they were doing.
But obviously they're also creating jobs. That's kind of the point. Now I'll just skip ahead to the end here.
The river itself, wide dams control the water step by step. Instead of the alternate floods and drought, water can now be dispatched as trains are dispatched on a railroad system.
There's our dam.
These are the symbols of a nation's constructive energy. Douglas, Guntersville,
These dams all still
Cherokee,
exist.
Wilson, Pickwick Landing, Chickamauga, Hiwassee, Fontana, Hales Bar, Watts Bar, Fort Loudon, Wheeler, Appalachia, Norris. Built for and owned by the people of the United States. Day and night, in peace and war, the dams work for the people. Power for the factories, power for new industry, power to run 1 million machines, turning out aircraft, tractors, textiles, engines, shoes, fertilizer, aluminum. cheap and abundant power to light the cities and villages, power for the farmers, power that can be converted to 100 homely uses, power working tirelessly, endlessly, raising standards, reducing drudgery, power in the hands of the people.
Probably not a good idea for people to be playing, kids to be playing on a dam.
The children of the Tennessee Valley have recaptured the hope of their grandfather.
Oh, we shouldn't be doing that.
They have learned that the TVA is indeed a yardstick, a measure of what men can build in peace, a measure of the stature of a new and better world, a world with dignity, work, and hope for all, a world a child can walk into.
Right, so you get some idea then of, what the TVA was trying to do. It was trying to build not only the regional economic planning and build, get power and whatnot, but also just trying to change the sentiment in the economy. Make people more optimistic and confident about the direction that the economy was taking. Besides the TVA, which again still exists to this day, you get something that actually doesn't exist anymore. Basically was declared unconstitutional shortly after it was passed, and that would be the National Industrial Recovery Act. The National Industrial Recovery Act, what it was designed to do is it was designed to organize entire industries. And what they would do is they would impose codes that would dictate to companies what their prices should be and what the wages paid to employees should be. These basically was controlling commerce, controlling all of the industries. In the end, all it really did was it redistributed money rather than expanding the size of the economy. It was declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court basically said to the government, to the federal government, you really can't control how private businesses run. You can't dictate things in that kind of way. I want to show this because they did actually make a little bit of a promotional piece about the National Recovery Act, called the NRA, not National Rifle Association, but National Recovery Act. And this one's rather short. Now this person, the guy that's bowing, he actually ends up being the voice of, when you hear it, you'll recognize it. It's Frosty the Snowman from like the old cartoon. It's Frosty the Snowman, who I guess was an unemployed actor. And here you got the National Recovery Administration with an eagle, and the phrase, which was, "We do our part." And he's going to sing a song called "Give a Man a Job," which I'm guessing is basically about increasing employment. And this is from the height of the Great Depression, 1933. So it's a little bit dated, but it's rather short.
You and you and you and you, you've got a president now. He gave the land a new deal. You hold the cards, now you deal. You and you and you and you put shoulders to the plow. He gave us what we asked for, now pay him back somehow. Step out in front, get back of the president, and give a man a job. He bore the brunt, now bear with the president, and give a man a job. If the old name of Roosevelt makes the old heart proud, you take this message straight from the president and give a man a job.
Now, we're going to keep listening to this here, but as you saw in the very beginning, as you can kind of see with the, let's see here, this is at 108. Sorry, I just timed it wrong. As you can see here, people would have seen this before they were going to see a movie, which would have been the kind of the popular way of becoming entertained in the 1930s.
Give a man a job. You look like a banker. Who drives your car?
I drive it myself, have a cigar.
Keep your cigar and hire a chauffeur, and keep a man from becoming a loafer.
Right, so there he's telling the banker, stop driving yourself to work, hire a chauffeur to drive you, and by doing that, you'll give the guy a job, the chauffeur a job.
You look like a grocer.
No, sir, my job's extermination.
That, by the way, that actor is, I don't know who he is, but of the Three Stooges, that's one of the Three Stooges. I don't know the name of that actor, but I'm guessing here he is unemployed as well. But that's one of the three original Stooges, of the Three Stooges. I think it's a Larry.
You must give your assistants each a nice weekend vacation, and I'll need more men to kill the rats. We want you to hire a crowd. You'll do good work if you hang out this sign that means no rats allowed. What's the matter with you?
I'm a very sick woman.
Oh, a hypochondriac. You must get a doctor for pneumonia, a doctor for insomnia, one for osmosis and two for halitosis, one for anemia and one for eczema, neuritis, bronchitis, phlebitis, St. or any other kind of an itis that will delight us. You must get a doctor for every disease you got. In that way, it'll give you lots of enjoyment. And in that way, madam, you will help to end unemployment. Now listen to me, everybody. Step out in front. Get back at the president and give a man a job. You know he bore the brunt. You know that. I know it. So step out and give a man a job. You know who's in back of this in the NRA? No? Well, I'll tell you. And when I do, it'll give you heart of trouble. You take this message straight from the president and get a man a job.
So the idea there was everyone should start hiring more people, and the idea of the NRA was that the economy would expand in size. But again, the data suggests that the economy did not get larger. All it really did was just redistributed income, the existing income that existed. And the financial system, again, playing up to this theme again of the financial system that was basically destroyed with the Great Depression. You've got the banking system, the securities market, the international financial system, and the Federal Reserve System that all had to be rebuilt during the Great Depression. With banking, we saw in the previous chapter that we had the banking panic and that the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the FDIC, did a good deal to reduce the panic and create confidence. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, In 1933, 1934, 1935, the Securities and Exchange Commission imposed various regulations for institutions that were issuing shares or even just on traders in general. For instance, that all companies that have shares have to issue an annual report. That all comes from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission. One of the early things that Roosevelt does as well is he takes the U.S. off of the gold standard. So no longer can U.S. dollars be traded, exchanged for gold. So that's how the international financial system was reformed. And additionally, the Federal Reserve System was strengthened by centralizing power, monetary policy power was centralized with the Board of Governors, the Federal Reserve Board, in 1935. So basically, you get a lot of centralization and building of confidence within the system. This is what would have been had to have been displayed in every post office. Would have basically been a line that basically said it is now illegal to own dollars, basically, that could be exchanged for gold. You need to turn them in, and you need to get new cash that's fiat cash. And dude, people did it. Again, saw it as their patriotic duty to turn in their money, which could have been exchanged for gold, and it was declared illegal to own that kind of stuff, and turn it in for regular dollar bills. What this would have looked like at the time. This is from, I guess, a bill from 1928. This would have been what a $10 bill would have looked like in 1928. But as you can see here, it says gold certificate, and that you can always turn it in for gold, right? So it says here, $10 in gold coin payable to the bearer on demand. So people had to turn in this $10 bill, and they'd be given a different kind of $10 bill that could not be traded for anything else. So basically, it is illegal. It would have been illegal to hold something like this, to own something like this. I don't think it's still illegal. It's probably just considered a collector's item, I'm guessing. And as again, part of the reforms that are all happening, you get the Agricultural Adjustment Act in 1933. And what this does is it basically restricts farm prices, basically raises farm prices by restricting how much is grown or destroying stuff. So if there were too many pigs out there, too much pork, the government would pay for it and then destroy it, and thus create, less pork in the market, thus raising the price. This was also, the Agricultural Adjustment Act was declared unconstitutional in 1936, saying, kind of like with the NRA, this is a power for the states, not the Congress. It turned out that just destroying crops is a pretty bad way to control agriculture. The way we do it today is food stamps and giving the food for free to starving countries around the world. Now, the labor market is fundamentally transformed during the Great Depression. This is when being part of a union is made a federal right to join a union. So employees gained the right to collectively bargain. The CIO, the Congress of Industrial, or the Congress of Industrial Organization, I think, CIO, was the largest union at the time, and it merged with the AFL, the American Federation of Labor, in 1935 to create the country's largest union. And so then you had the AFL-CIO, you had the Teamsters, you had very large unions then all emerging. And people were given the right to, again, organize, collectively bargain, and strike. Well, you can't have a union if you can't strike, right? Because that's kind of, what you've got going on there in a union is you've got a right to say, well, we're not going to work for whatever these conditions are. Now, being part of a union, it obviously became very popular during the Great Depression. If you could get a job. And the belief was that at the time that your wages would be higher and that your working conditions would be better as part of having, being part of a union. It did reflect a shift in sentiment. The belief was, before that, you really didn't need a union. No employer is going to mistreat their workers, and if they do, the workers would just leave for a better employer. And workers are only going to be motivated to work hard if they can get private benefit rather than collectively working with everyone else to get a joint benefit. And the Great Depression changed this, such that people then saw that their best option was actually to organize and strike. And they were given this power to do this with the National Labor Relations Act. Employers were also required to bargain with employees on that collective basis. Now, and when we look at the New Deal and what, again, kind of comes out of this is we have some of those programs still to this day, such as, again, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, Social Security, unemployment compensation, minimum wages. All those programs still exist. There is a safety net, and we certainly saw during COVID-19 and during the 2008-2009 financial crisis that those programs did their job. But what the New Deal also did is it did make people more optimistic. And the government did start to be seen as a possible solution to an economic problem. I put in the quote from the book because it just was that important that, the concern about the New Deal and even the concern about someone like Roosevelt as president was that he was going to just, create socialism, get rid of capitalism. And that the important legacy of the New Deal was that it didn't get rid of capitalism. Capitalism still survived, despite things like unionization, and even things like the TVA. But what you did have was an expanded role for the government. And people quite truly, saw President Roosevelt as like the president that saved them. My my grandfather would tell this story that, so one of the earliest things that Roosevelt did when he became president was we passed I don't know which amendment it was, but it was the amendment that allowed people, that it ended prohibition, so people could then start drinking legally again. And so then you've got bars and everything else like that. And bars, restaurants, lots of public places would all have a picture of Roosevelt, right? So I don't know if we can kind of see an example here. I'm not sure if I'm just going to click images. I'm not sure if we can see good examples of this, but here we go. Here's a good example. Right, so you would have just a typical bar, and they would all have a picture of the president, of Roosevelt, where these people felt like he had saved them. And my grandfather would tell the story that, you know, he went to some bar, and that this picture looked really bad. Like it was a bad picture. Like the cheeks were too rosy, apparently. And that the person sitting next to him, my grandfather at the bar, had said something like, "Oh, wow, that's a really bad picture of Roosevelt, right? He looks really horrible." And the bartender threw the guy out just for saying that. Like, that gives you a sense of like how attached people felt to Roosevelt, and the attachment they felt to him, for basically a perception of rescued, from the depths of the Great Depression. And certainly you can see, I mean, I'm not sure if we can see any other better examples here, but I mean, this is a pretty good example of what that kind of thing would have looked like. Don't really see anything else here. Except the bar that's called FDR Bar. Yeah, I don't really see anything. But fortunately, we do see that where it was a pretty good example. Okay. Okay. Now, the New Deal doesn't end the Great Depression. In fact, as we'll see in the next chapter, really the only thing that's going to end the Great Depression is World War II.